On April 5, 1968, Flight Lieutenant Alan Pollock took his 4.4 million pound Hawker Hunter on an unauthorized detour to downtown London. The roar of jet engines echoed through the streets of Britain's capital as Flight Lieutenant Alan Pollock pushed his aircraft to its limits. Below him, the Thames snaked through the city, its waters reflecting the morning sun. Pedestrians stopped in their tracks, heads turning skyward at the thunderous sound of a military jet flying near street level. He had already broken every rule in the book, abandoned his squadron, flown without authorization, and descended to dangerous altitudes over one of the world's busiest cities. He knew this flight would end his career, but he didn't care. Some messages must be sent at any cost. As he rounded the river bend at 700 miles per hour, a colossal structure loomed ahead through the morning haze, its Gothic towers piercing the sky. His hands tightened on the controls as an irresistible idea formed. I'd forgotten it was there. Until this very instant, I'd had absolutely no idea that Tower Bridge would be there. It was easy enough to fly over it, but the idea of flying through the spans suddenly struck me. As a member of Squadron 1, the oldest unit in the Royal Air Force, Flight Lieutenant Alan Pollock was a passionate airman who strived to represent everything the Royal Air Force stood for. Yet, in the 1960s, things were changing quickly. With each drastic reform, the British government seemed to be drifting further and further away from the values that had made the RAF what it was. Defense budgets were shifting from the research and development of new aircraft to the pursuit of guided missile technology, which was seen as the future of warfare during the Cold War. Pollock and many of his fellow airmen felt deeply disillusioned by these developments, a resentment that grew exponentially with each passing year. However, the straw that broke the camel's back happened in 1968, when, for the highly anticipated 50th anniversary of the RAF, the government announced there would be no flypast event over London. There were plans for an official dinner party and a few parades, but not a single aircraft would fly over the skies of Britain's capital to commemorate the Air Force that had helped liberate Europe. To Pollock, this was nothing short of a slap in the face. He later reflected, "One thing that was in the Air Force's blood was that you celebrated in the air, not on the ground." He made a plan. From the first moment the idea came into his head, he knew it meant the end of his career as an RAF pilot. He would be arrested, put on trial, and possibly imprisoned for the rest of his life. It didn't matter. He was determined to send his message. It was worth flying over London, even if I was going to get court-martialed. He figured at least the trial would give him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to let the world know all the issues facing the RAF. A window opened on April 4th, when he and his squadron flew out on a mission from his base, RAF Rainham, Norfolk, to RAF Tangmere, Sussex, where they were to participate in the preparations for the base being given the freedom of the city of Chichester. That night, he decided that the next day, as they returned, he would give his squadron the slip and take a detour toward the capital. The following day, as soon as they took off aboard their Hawker Hunter jets, Pollock began to report communication issues with his flight instruments. He told his wingmen he had lost visual contact, and then he noted that his communications were out by tapping coded messages using his transmitter. Now, he had precious minutes before his squad mates realized they had been lied to. He dropped as low as he could, hugging the ground to avoid being detected by radar or other RAF pilots, and to avoid interference with any commercial flights. His heart pounded in his ears, and after a long career of obedience and excellence, he realized it was the first time he was doing something like this. He reached Heathrow Airport and made a hard right toward Richmond Park before reaching the Thames. He dropped even lower, to less than 150 feet, almost skimming over the river as he flew over countless bridges, ships, and power lines. He meticulously maintained his Hunter in the middle of the river, while scanning the skies for any possible helicopter that might be already looking for a rogue RAF jet fighter. The city loomed ahead. Once there, he knew exactly where he was headed to find the people responsible for the whole situation. He pushed the throttle levers all the way and made his way to the Houses of Parliament. Pollock was ecstatic. He later remembered that moment. "I put the power on then. I thought, stuff it, let them hear some noise." In what has to be one of the most ironic moments in history, lawmakers were actually discussing a noise pollution bill when the thundering roar of the sonic boom blasted through their halls. A few blocks away, in the Ministry of Defense building, World War II Spitfire ace and defense consultant Wilfred Duncan Smith was talking to Sir John Grandy, Chief of the Air Staff, when they heard the maddeningly loud engines. Duncan Smith recognized that a warplane was flying by, and both men rushed towards a balcony to see the source of the ruckus. Grandy looked toward the sky looking for the plane, but Duncan Smith, unable to contain his awe, pointed down and said, "No, look down there." A silver jet fighter dashed past almost at street level, the deafening roar of its engine cracking windows all across downtown London. After a couple more daredevil passes over some of the most iconic buildings in London, Pollock's adrenaline subsided. He made a turn and prepared to call it a day. That's when he saw it. There, staring me in the face, was Tower Bridge. I'd forgotten it was there. Until this very instant, I'd had absolutely no idea that Tower Bridge would be there. It was easy enough to fly over it, but the idea of flying through the spans suddenly struck me. I had just 10 seconds to grapple with the seductive proposition which few ground attack pilots of any nationality could have resisted. My brain started racing to reach a decision. Years of fast, low-level strike flying made the decision simple. The prospect of doing something no one had attempted before was irresistible. With adrenaline and hubris pumping through his veins, he forgot for a moment that the bridge was bustling with commuting drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians. The tiniest miscalculation could result in a tragedy of monumental proportions. Yet, almost in a trance, the pilot carried on. He swiftly adjusted his trajectory as the jet rushed to meet the narrow gap between the bottom and top spans of the bridge. It was going to be a close call, but he was sure of his ability. Then it dawned on him, right at the last minute, as my cockpit canopy was just below the bridge and the girders were all around me. In that microsecond, I remembered I'd got a tail fin behind, and I thought, I'm going to lose the fin. For just 1 millisecond, some of the people on the bridge got a fleeting glimpse of the incoming threat. A cyclist on the bridge fell off his bike in fear, ripping his trousers. George Tapper, the Tower Bridge watchman, could not believe his eyes. There was this huge, thunderous roar. I looked up and whoomph, a big silver jet shot by. A last-second adjustment allowed Pollock to pass through the bridge without losing his tail fin and without causing any damage to the structure or the people on it, though leaving many of them in shock. Unaware of the spectacle, others simply wondered where the loud sound had come from. Aware that his flying status would likely be revoked due to this stunt, the pilot continued to buzz several airfields, Wattisham, Lakenheath, and Marham, flying inverted at about 200 feet on his way back to his base at RAF West Raynham, where Flying Officer Roger Gilpin formally arrested him minutes after touchdown. The consequences Pollock faced came in like a wrecking ball. His unit was deployed to North Africa without him, and he was forced to stay grounded as the investigation unfolded. He was told to prepare to be court-martialed. But then the case took an unexpected turn. Pollock's squadron received hundreds of congratulatory letters from RAF colleagues and the public, as well as a barrel of beer from British Overseas Airways Corporation. An all-party support motion was even tabled in the House of Commons, signed by 6 MPs, 4 of whom were former RAF members. Eventually, he was discharged from the RAF on medical grounds, which avoided a court-martial and spared the government the potential embarrassment of Pollock explaining his actions publicly and possibly gaining public support. Pollock's stunt will forever be remembered as the only time a jet flew through the London Tower Bridge.